We move on to our next.
And therefore, the AI may perpetuate this discrimination, and certain people with certain social backgrounds may have less chances to enter universities or to get good jobs. This we need to make sure that this doesn't happen. And then we have a small group of applications which are really socially harmful and that we want to prohibit from the start. And these are things where you use subliminal techniques, where you exploit vulnerabilities, where you do social scoring by public authorities. So you score, you give points, and then the public authorities accordingly decide how to allocate benefits or obligations. And this is live facial recognition in public spaces for law enforcement purposes. This should be prohibited with some very narrow exceptions. This was very much in the public debate, in the media in the last days. Here we go, we want, and therefore I spent perhaps two more words on this. We want to make every remote biometric identification high risk. So all these systems must be safe, and we restrict, even beyond GDPR and the law enforcement directives, the use of these systems in public spaces for public law enforcement authorities. One should bear in mind when one reads the proposal that, of course, the General Data Protection Regulation and the law enforcement directive will continue to apply, and they already foresee very strict requirements. We do this on top of that because we think that these are particular harmful obligations. Last but not least, our regulation should be an internal market regulation. So we really want to basically look at the products before they enter the market, and then the products, once they are on the market, should be open to use. There should not be complex obligations for the users or for the different people involved in the use. So we want to create a market for this. That's the positive element again. And we want to create a level playing field. So we don't want to discriminate. We want every product in Europe, every AI should play according to the same rules, but it should be open. And we are working there with our international partners. We want to set standards because we think that these essential requirements will in the end be translated mainly by standards, which should then allow the individual operator to prepare well. We want to light governance with a bit of European touch with the European AI board, but the bulk of the administration will be by the member states. So we think, after all, we hope that we manage a bit to square the circle, to have a regulation which can help the uptake of AI by not overly burdening the development of AI. And we have, of course, some measures for developers and innovators, sandboxes, support measures that I couldn't come across, but this, I think, is very important. And if I had more time, I would love to talk more about that. But this is a crucial element. So we really try to find a fine balance that we make clear 80-90% is safe. You don't need to do anything. You can trust it. Those AI applications which are not perhaps entirely safe from the start, we will make them safe through our requirements. So once they have a CE label and they are on our market, they will be fine. And certain users will not occur, so you don't need to be afraid of AI governing or ruling the world. This will not happen in Europe. In Europe, AI should be at the service of the people and not off the top of the people taking the decisions instead of the humans. Now I have to stop because otherwise I exceed my time. But you see, I get passionate, and I wish you a passionate discussion about this because I think it's a topic which very much deserves this. So thanks a lot for inviting me.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Groß, for this excellent overview of the Commission's proposal. I'm sure we will have more time to discuss it in more detail soon. But for now, it was really helpful. So let me now turn to our panelists. I welcome Dr. Anna Christmann, who is a spokeswoman for innovation and technology policy for the Greens in the German Parliament, and was chairwoman of the Bundestag Expert Commission on AI from 2018 until 2020. Welcome. I also welcome Dr. Jörg Wojahn, who is head of the European Commission's representation in Berlin. And finally, I welcome Susanne Dehmel, member of Bitkom's managing board and active in several high-level expert committees on AI. Maybe a short comment for our audience as well. I encourage you to comment on the discussion in the chat, of course. Due to the short time we have, I will probably not be able to take up all the questions, but I try to pick up on as many points as possible. So let's let the discussions begin. Let me first turn to you, Dr. Wojahn. We just heard that the AI uptake in Europe is supposed to be accelerated with basically clearer rules. We also know that there's some big investments in the pipeline. Two questions to you on this. Could you explain how exactly these rules will increase trust? And secondly, what investment programs are going to facilitate AI uptake in Europe?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ben. In the first place, we are convinced trust is a must to ensure that KI picks up in Europe. It's not that it isn't there, but there's still a lot of room for improvement, and we see it very comprehensively. Our view is not just a regulatory one. We do this regulatory approach also with the idea of promoting the technology as such. And in our research programs, we have already had quite some success in terms of promoting and helping the development of AI. But now we have to look more into the applications. So in the new EU funding programs starting this year until 2027, we will put much more emphasis onto the development of applications for AI. Our Digital Europe program will not only foresee money, but also structures like digital innovation hubs and regulatory sandboxes, because we see that the situation is particularly challenging for small and medium-sized companies in Europe. The big ones anyways know more or less where they're heading, but we need to support the smaller ones. And we are convinced that we need some regulatory framework to create the necessary trust. You know, in the society there are some doubts, and if we have these doubts and opposition, we cannot succeed.
Yes, thank you. Also from your experience, maybe from other areas, how can we make sure that sort of national and European investments work hand in hand and not are scattered all around the place, but really go in the same direction?
Yeah, Kilian has already mentioned this. We have a coordinated plan with member states on AI already since 2018. We have proposed an update for this yesterday. It's part of our package, which we presented yesterday. Maybe just to recall, we have essentially presented 3 elements: a coordinated plan on how to promote AI in Europe together with the member states. The second element was the regulatory part on which Kilian had focused. And there's also the aspect of AI in machinery. And this is something particularly important, I think, in Germany, a country which is very successful in building machinery, even though the concept of machinery in our regulation is a bit broader. But here we also provide how this is combined and how we can the combined force of AI and physical machinery.
Dr. Christmann, now AI systems are not entirely new, but are already used in a lot of different fields like manufacturing, mobility, medical devices, electronics, and so on. You live in Baden-Württemberg, if I'm not mistaken, which has the Cyber Valley in Tübingen as a strong model, in fact, in application-oriented research. From your experience, what are the best practices others can learn from? And what are the clearly positive developments there?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Of course, we are very proud of our Cyber Valley in Baden-Württemberg, which is well known also outside, not only outside Baden-Württemberg, but also outside Germany and Europe. It's really a global AI hub that is growing there. And I think that is the very important thing, that we have very prominent AI hubs in Europe. That really lead to people coming to us who want to develop AI in Europe and who want to be part of our ecosystem around AI. And so I also think that the 2 things we got from Europe yesterday are a really good package, because we need both. We really need the expertise, and we need like a coordinated plan in Europe. I have doubts that it is really coordinated, because, I mean, for example, the German government is not really investing in European AI so far. I think that is not good. We should participate more in this European plan from the German side. And on the other hand, we also need the regulatory framework. So it's also good that we have now propositions from the European level to have different risk levels. And I think it's also going to be important that we have the discussion about these different types of risks, that we really reach the society, the people, to get into a debate. What do we want from AI? AI, and where do we want to prohibit it because it can be harmful. I think that is a very important discussion as well. But we need both. We need the expertise. We need to be good in AI in Europe, and we need the regulatory framework. And I think places like the Cyber Valley are a good example where we can get this expertise and where we also have the transfer to the ecosystem, to the economy, which is very important as well.
Yeah, it really makes sense. Maybe one follow-up question on this. You mentioned the importance of the ecosystem. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit the role of data access or data sharing, if it plays a role or does it not? Because if you followed some of the presentations before our panel, there's a lot about data as sort of the necessary baseline to train AI algorithms. So if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, data is essential to develop AI, and I regret that we have often a focus on the kind of personal data we have in social media. We have always the GAFA discussion about Facebook, etc. But we have many more data in Germany and in Europe, especially in the industrial sector and also the SME. They have lots of data they don't use so far. And I think we need more support for them to make it easy to share data in a trustful way, and there we need more sandboxes like regulatory options, how they can share data with other SMEs, and I think that is a big task for the next years to establish more data sharing systems and also more data pools. And there we need data pools in the different sectors, I think, the health sector, the mobility sector. And it's essential that all different players participate in these kind of pools. We need the economy involved, but also like public data from the communities. All of these different actors need to be participating into these kind of data pools, so to make them really useful for the development of AI.
Mm-hmm. Susanne, now we heard a clear success story of the Cyber Valley in Tübingen. But if we are honest to ourselves, in general, Germany is having some trouble to build on its world-class fundamental research to develop products and services here. So why do you think is it such a problem for Germany? Is it the institutional setup? Is it a lack of funding, a lack of cooperation, a lack of regulatory certainty that we clearly try to address now, or a lack of testing facilities, or is there even simply no appetite for innovation?
Well, that was many possible reasons, and I think the answer is not, there's not the one reason, but we probably actually have to look at a number of factors. I think we've just heard about the Cyber Valley, and we've also heard about that from Professor Schürkopf yesterday, who had a presentation on this, and it's certainly one aspect that we have to tie together the different players, the research facilities with companies. So that might be one building block. Another one might be what we could think about in Germany is that the basic research is all in the hands of one ministry, and the research for applied or nearer to actual economics is at the Ministry for Economics. And I think we probably need a holistic view on all our support and research programs. So maybe it would also help to bring those a little nearer together and even more. I know they exchange, but maybe we need a more intertwined approach to that. And third thing, I think, is that regulatory sandboxes might help, but I think it should be the goal that our regulatory framework as a whole works better together with our overall goal of being successful in creating innovative AI. So what I want to say is that sometimes when I look at our regulatory framework like the GDPR, like maybe the upcoming Data Governance Act, it might not fit exactly on what we actually like companies to do. So when we ask companies about what makes it difficult for them to innovate, we very often hear about legal insecurity, and also data protection is quite frequently named. So I think we have to look closely on what we want, where we want to get, and what is the right legal framework for that, without denying any risks, but trying to get really tailor-made solutions for the risks that arise, and also for the chances.
Yeah, definitely. Let's now zoom out a little bit, because we focused a lot on Germany, a lot on Europe. But as we all know, this topic is very much a global one. Let's have a look at the global situation. The EU is falling behind in terms of AI-related investments and startups. China is taking the lead in research. It's not AI related in a direct sense, but regarding supercomputers, the US is moving past Europe. So there is certainly a degree of urgency. Dr. Wojahn, why is it that Europe is falling behind? If we all agree that it's so important, shouldn't that be sort of a wake-up call?
I think we have woken up, and the European Commission under Ursula von der Leyen has made this one of its priorities from the beginning. And what we have been proposing since then, I think, is proof of this. And I would not only mention what we put on the table yesterday regarding artificial intelligence in particular, but also our data strategy. Mrs. Christmann had already mentioned the wealth of industrial data which we have here in Europe and which needs to be tapped. And in our data strategy, which we proposed last year, we are pointing to this. And of course, it is true. In the area of mass data, the US and even China is ahead of us. But here I have to also come back to what our motto is. Trust is a must here in artificial intelligence. The Chinese end goal is to have as much control as possible over the individual. The US philosophy is rather a profit-centered approach, but our European one is a human-centered approach. And we have to live up to this. And this philosophy as such is also a path to success. And I would like to point out that today we saw a tweet from the White House welcoming what we put on the table yesterday. So even in the US, we now have an ally. But you are right, and it is true. We have to really do some catch-up work to do. And as Europeans, we are trying to do our part with funding, but also with the regulatory framework.
Yeah, it's extremely interesting what you said, because the European approach is a sort of human-centered AI. It's interesting on the other hand that on a societal level, 75% of citizens apparently do not know what AI even is. So, Susanne, I wanted to ask you, we also heard that the EU is aiming for a very broad definition of AI. Do you think this is helpful to kind of address this problem that people don't know really what AI is? Or wouldn't it make more sense to look at AI in specific sectors? And what does this approach kind of mean for regulating the technology?
Well, I think we all know, everyone who's ever been on an expert in an expert commission on AI knows how difficult it is to define what AI actually is, and because it has so many facets, and we all don't know in which directions it will further develop. So I think what the Commission did was quite a pragmatic move by defining AI in general very broadly, maybe too broadly. I think most software will be in the scope if you look at it. But then the consequences of the regulation only hit the so-called high-risk applications in our AI systems. And I think in principle that's a good approach to only look at the really risky applications, and then in principle also look into the different sectors in the concrete applications. And this is, I think this is what the Commission tried to do by looking at the already harmonized areas where we have safety regulation in place, and look at the or kind of combine the existing safety regulation with a new element of safe AI. But there's also this, they also go a step further, and I think it's harder to judge where this will lead us to, because there's also a number of AI systems that are named in the Annex 3 of the regulation that haven't been regulated so far. So that's a whole new regulation, and there are so far, for most of these applications, there are also no common known standards. So they will have to be developed so that companies are able to actually fulfill the requirements of the new regulation. And that's I think it'll be, we all cannot tell at the moment how big will be the or how many resources will be bound by all these processes that you need to fulfill and you have to undergo. So this has to be in relation to the risks that actually are caused by these systems. And I think we will discuss about that in the ongoing process. What we don't want is actually requirements that hinder innovation. So it all has to be in a sound relation, and we have to go through this process quickly, I think, so that we soon have a clear guideline on where's the corridor in which we can actually act.
Mm-hmm. I would like to go back to this acceptance points. Dr. Christmann, you mentioned it in your first answer, how important it is to get people on board, basically, to accept the technology, to use it. So what is the right strategy in your opinion? Do you think it needs more positive examples? Just to give you one example, the other day I read about a startup which is using AI algorithms to analyze wholesale data of ingredients with retail data of meals for large canteens in correlation with weather conditions and the time of the year, for example, if it's a vacation or not, to reduce food waste, which I actually found a really nice, positive example, very concrete. Do you think there should be more of these? Is the discussion sometimes too abstract? And what's your experience on the ground, so to say, when you talk to your constituents?
Yeah, I mean, I think acceptance is very important, and acceptance comes with positive impact of AI. And I think that is something we must show where is AI really a positive asset to the things we want to achieve. And of course, for me as a green politician, I always think of AI to fight the climate crisis and to make windcraft more efficient, photovoltaic, all these things. We need a smart Energiewende, which will be much more effective than without AI. So these are all examples that are positive. Also in the health sector, I think people want to be healthy, and they also are likely that they want to share data to make their health services better. So I think there are many positive examples, and we should talk more about them. But it's also clear that always in the public debate, we're going to talk more about conflict than about the positive example, because the points where conflict are more interesting for the debate. And there, I think it's important that we really have a public debate. And also, I can mention the Cyber Valley here, which has an ethics board that is involved in the research that is happening there. And in the board, there are people from Fridays for Future, but also from literature, like very interdisciplinary. And they kind of discuss things that are going on there in research and application. And I think that is also a good example how you can bring society into the debate on AI. And that's what we should do on a broader level to really have this public debate about chances and risks. And then we can also, I think, get the trust of the people for the things where AI can really be positive. But it's also important to then have a public debate what we don't want. And then it's also okay when people say facial recognition is nothing that we want to have in Europe.
Mm. And just out of curiosity, do you see a generational difference? It's often said that the younger generation is somewhat said to be more open to technology. Do you witness this as well, or what's your impression that you get?
Yeah, I mean, there is always a generation gap in digital questions because younger people are more used to digital tools, but also I think some of them are a little bit more skeptical, as like the very young generation compared to maybe mid-agers, because they also know more about what you can do with digital tools and how far they reach into your personal life. So I think there is a generation factor, but it's not the most important one. And we should try to bring all generations into this debate. Because elderly people, for example, can be much affected when it comes to AI in the care sector and to the question, do I want to have a AI robot at home to assist me or not? And these are important questions. And there we should bring all people into this debate.
Absolutely. Dr. Wojahn, where do you stand on this? When you think of AI, where would you picture useful applications? And also, would it make more sense from your point of view to focus on more actual use cases when we assess the sort of benefits and societal risks about the technology?
Yeah, I think Anna Christmann made the point. We need trust and acceptance, and for this, positive showcases are useful. She mentioned the areas which would come to my mind. Of course, health is a very current one, and here for diagnosis, for development of medicines, you name it, virus, vaccines, obviously. But as I don't want to repeat what she said, I would point out one other risk, in particular in this area, and that's the risk of disinformation. Which is our greatest enemy, I think. Here, look, here we are in an area where I can really fathom people who are using Facebook and like virtually undressing themselves in front of Facebook and let all their data go away, but then go out and demonstrate against AI combined windmills because somebody told them that is somehow bad for birds. No? And we have seen this with the vaccine also, how easily people can fall victim to disinformation on such issues. You have the same people who don't want to use AstraZeneca, but shout, oh, let's order Sputnik, even though nobody has ever tested it. So this is an area where we will really be facing a big lump of disinformation, which will then, and maybe even targeted to undermine European role and European catching up in this area.
And Susanne, I know that you are in a lot of these discussions on AI, on the technology. From your experience, would you say that the discussion is mostly driven by a certain diffuse fear maybe of the future, or is it driven by actual cases? Or what's your view? How could we make sure that the discussion doesn't drift apart in one or the other extreme direction?
Well, I think as probably most of the time, the discussion is not really driven by the overall view of known positive or negative examples, but it's small. That I think there are some conflicting feelings, either in private persons and companies. When I look at our last surveys, yesterday we presented one we did in the German industry or economy. 62% of the companies saw chances first in AI, and last year when we asked citizens, it was even 68% who said it's it's chance, first of all, more than a risk. But at the same time, I think it's hard to foresee for people what is coming up and what AI may do to them, how it may change their workplaces for companies, how this will affect their business models. I mean, I think it's quite easy for the management of companies to see some of the efficiency advantages and like a gradual development of their processes, but to foresee what might be your new business model once things are done in another way, because we have totally new ways of handling things, because machines can do some things that we need a long time for in very short time, and they can really enhance our abilities. This is hard to tell, and I think this is part of why we also discuss a lot about the risks. And the less you know about AI, the more the view comes from Hollywood films and these pictures that you have in your head. And so I think it's one important. It's really an important task to show what does this actually mean in practice, to show the cases we already have, and to explain what else is possible.
Absolutely. We only have 2 minutes left, I was told. So to conclude, I would just like to come back to the start of our discussion, and I would just like to ask you, what do you hope for in the coming regulatory discussions on the EU level? How, maybe just in 1 or 2 sentences, like if you have a wish list, like what would you hope for? Maybe let's start with Susanne, then Dr. Wojahn, and as a final word to Dr. Christmann in the end.
Well, I actually hope for a really differentiated and fact-based discussion with all players, not a too emotionally driven debate.
Yeah, this would indeed be very helpful. And speed, I think we also need a rather quick process, and we need every day, every month counts to be able to catch up to the other competitors out there.
Yeah, and I wish for a very inclusive public debate where everyone can participate and where civil society also plays a big role. That's my wish for the debate. And I wish for much higher investments from the European level, but also from the German level for research and development so that we reach really to AI made in Europe, which I think is very important.
Great. Thank you very much to our speakers for their time and insights. I certainly learned a lot. I'm sure this important discussion will stay with us for a long time. But again, thank you. Have a nice day. And for now, I would like to give the word to my colleague Lucas to discuss the not less exciting project of Gaia X. See you soon.